So, what you do, the cure for all of burnout actually, is not self care. I would never think that a woman of color or any person who doesn't conform to the very narrow socially constructed ideal could possibly resist this intense pressure from the outside on their own. Like, you can't stand up in a flood and expect just to, be strong enough to do it on your own. The cure for burnout is all of us caring for each other.
Welcome to the Writing on My Mind podcast. This is where we discuss all things related to the doctoral journey. On this show, I share personal stories and bring some friends along for revealing conversations about their journey and provide inspiration for others to level up as doc students. I'm your host, Dr. Emmanuela Stanislaus. I'm a doctorate coach and diversity consultant. I finished my doctorate in 4 years while working full-time, traveling the world, and balancing a busy social life. And now I'm on a mission to create community for other women of color to complete their doctoral degrees. This is real talk to help you along your doctoral journey. Now, let's get to the show. Hello, Dr. Emmanuela here, back with another episode of the Writing on My Mind podcast. And today I am so excited for the guest that we have. So I'm just going to jump right into her bio so that we can get on this important topic of burnout, exploring burnout and how it relates to the experiences of doctoral students. So today we have Amelia Nagoski, D.M.A., which stands for Doctorate of Musical Arts. And she is the co-author with her sister, Emily, of the New York Times bestselling Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. Her job is to run around waving her arms and making funny noises and generally doing whatever it takes to help singers get in touch with their internal experience. She lives in New England with her husband, 1 cat, and 2 rescue dogs. So, Amelia, I am so happy to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Yay. So I shared before we started recording how much I'm a fan of the book Burnout. And really, it's because I was experiencing burnout myself. I've been having conversations with friends as well as some of my clients who are doctoral students and are experiencing this same thing. And so December, I think I bought this book maybe summer of last year, but didn't get a chance to open it up until December. And I was just highlighting everything. I was just like, everyone needs to know more about this. And I was so excited when you agreed to be on the show. So I'm going to jump right into this. What inspired you and your sister to write Burnout?
It began during my doctoral program when I was hospitalized for stress-induced illness. I just woke up one night right before the start of the semester in January and had abdominal pain so bad. I really thought I was going to die. So I went to the emergency room. They couldn't find anything wrong with me, with my body physically. So they said, oh, it's just stress. Go home and relax, which, I was a doctoral student, a full-time doctoral student, commuting 65 miles each way to my campus, and also stepmother to 3 teenagers and also working 3 part-time jobs. So, like, go home and relax was not information I could act on. But luckily, I have an identical twin sister who has a PhD in public health. Emily Nagoski is my twin sister, the Emily Nagoski. So the way we express our love is like through peer-reviewed research. So she brought me these stacks and stacks of studies that were about like how stress manifests in your body. And she was shocked that I didn't know. So when she shortly thereafter was writing and then published her first book, Come As You Are, The Surprising New Science That Will Transform Your Sex Life, which I'm sure everybody already knows about. One part of a chapter in there is about stress and feelings. So when she went around talking to people about that book, women would come up to her and say, yeah, thanks for all that sex science, but boy, that one thing that really helped me was that chapter about stress and feelings. And she was surprised. And she told me, God, I can't believe that this is the thing they're taking away from the book. And I was like, so remember that time I was in the hospital And then a year later, I was back in the hospital again. And it was that information from that chapter saved my life. I wasn't as surprised as she was. Because actually, when I read the science, it made absolute sense to me because I'm a musician by training. And my master's degree was at a conservatory where we learned very specifically, we were taught in an academic setting how to listen and feel our feelings and process them for the purpose of performance on stage. We didn't learn that it was transferable to like a real life skill. That is what I learned from Emily's research that she gave me in a great big pile when I thought I was going to die in the middle of my doctoral program. So she was astonished by it. She was astonished that I didn't know, because one of the things that I learned is that emotions are cycles that happen in your body, and that like your emotions are a real thing that happen physiologically because your nervous system has a response that travels into your muscles and all of your systems. And my job as a conductor is to express emotion through my body. So, like, I knew that emotion could be in my body. But the thing is, if emotions are in my body and they have been my whole life, and I have not been processing them the way that apparently we're supposed to process them, oh my God, is that a lot of emotion that I haven't dealt with? A lot of, and this is the thing that really stabbed me in the heart, was rage, repressed rage that I had never recognized or processed. In order to get out of my doctoral program alive, I had to learn to manage it, specifically the rage that I was experiencing about my program, which was Emily had a great time in her doctoral program. She was totally shocked by the way my doctoral program was going. She had support and a team of people who were like on her side. And I was like, what's that like? Because all I had was administrators and professors who needed me not to be who I am, even though very specifically when you're a conductor, who you are and what you have to say about the music and how you create relationships with your musicians in the ensemble is what makes you a different conductor from every other conductor. Like, being a conductor is being an artist, and your artistry comes from who you are, and they didn't want me to be who I was, and that friction was spurring the rage. It was beginning a fire of rage that I was trying not to recognize, because I thought that would kill me. Nope, turns out that holding the rage in and not acknowledging it was the thing that very nearly killed me twice.
Wow. Yeah. You you said a lot in that piece, and I can imagine. And I know you go through it in the book too, where you share both Emily's discovery of the topics that really stood out to folks from the book, and combining that collaboration, what created the collaboration between the two of you. And then you also talk about your specific experience too. And I can't help but think of several things, because the conductor, like, I think you even share this in the book too, that it's a male dominated field or position. And so you pushing up against that and the challenges that led for you. And I think too, with the audience that I have, I mean, of course, I'm focusing on women of color doctoral students, but I know men who listen to this too, and white men, or even faculty members. And so I think with women of color specifically in the doctoral space, how you do get a ton of messages that just share that you don't belong here, especially in the way that you present yourself. This is a space for men, or white men. And so that's so interesting that you talk about this. And I think too, when you're talking, you help me to think about like how you shared something in terms of like you didn't know that you didn't process some of the rage that you were experiencing, and how there's really no manual for how we should be working through life and stressors and that sort of thing. And so I wanted to talk a little about maybe like the stress cycle that you all kind of talk about in the book. What is the stress cycle, and how important is that to the topic of burnout? And maybe even talking a little bit about what is burnout? I don't know if we talked about that too. Like, what is your definition of burnout, and how does the stress cycle kind of play into that?
Yeah, this is the fundamental thing that I had to learn in order to save my life, and that was that, stress is an emotion that happens in your body. And emotions are cycles. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end, just like all the other systems that happen in your body, like circulation and respiration and, ew, sorry, but digestion. If something happens to interrupt that cycle, bad things result. And I was not 100% sure that emotions were like a real physiological thing, but the science is very, very clear. It's obvious to everyone except people who are like actively denying stuff. So burnout is when you get stuck in the middle of the cycle. That's when burnout happens. I mean, if I rewind a little bit to the very first definition of burnout and coining the term in a scientific study, that goes back to the 1970s. Herbert Freudenberger is a research psychologist who was studying air traffic controllers because their job was really stressful and they were burning out at rates that were like meaning there weren't enough air traffic controllers and the safety of passengers on flights in the 1970s. Who are people who are flying on airplanes who are interested in their safety? Oh, it's rich white men. So of course then there's a scientific study funded to discover why the air traffic controllers were risking the safety of all these rich white men. So what Herbert Freudenberger found was that there were three primary characteristics of burnout, and they were emotional exhaustion, decreased personalization, and decreased sense of accomplishment. And in the 40 years since then, it's been shown that the emotional exhaustion is the primary thing, especially for women, that we experience that causes burnout. So those are like the scientific definitions. The definition we gave in the book is that burnout is the feeling of being overwhelmed and exhausted, and yet still somehow worried that you're not doing enough. You're already doing so much that you're overwhelmed and exhausted, and yet you're like, well, maybe I should be doing more. Like, no, nope, nope. You can't be doing more because you're already doing as much as you can. So if that feels true for you, you might be burnt out or approaching burnout. So since emotional exhaustion is the primary experience of burnout for a lot of people, how you exhaust an emotion is to get stuck in the middle of the cycle that I was talking about. So let's talk about the stress cycle in particular. It's a physiological cycle that happens in your body. So you have to imagine yourself in the environment of evolutionary adaptiveness, and you're just going about your little like proto person day, and you see, there's a big scary thing, like a giant hippopotamus is running right at you, right? I love hippopotamuses. They're so dangerous, but so cute. I'm like, same girl. So here comes this big scary hippopotamus, and what happens inside your body? You probably feel your heart race. You probably feel your breathing deepen. You might feel like tingling along your skin. And what's happening is every system in your body is responding to the neurological signals and hormones, neurotransmitters that come from your brain that say, get ready to save our life. And this is fight or flight, right? And you can feel the things that happen, like your circulation, your respiration. You may even feel your digestive system respond if you have like little, rumblies in your tummy when you're nervous about things. That's the stress response talking to your digestive system. There are also things that happen below the level of conscious awareness that you're not noticing happen in your body. You might feel like your skin tingle a little bit. There's a couple of things that happen there. One is that your blood pulls away from the surface of your skin so that if you get cut, you are less likely to bleed to death. Another thing that happens is that there's a specific hormone that gets released during the stress response that has to do with your hair follicles and oil glands. So you might feel like the hair stand up on end, or you might notice longer down the line that if you tend to get acne when you're stressed, this is why. And you don't notice it happening at the time, but there's a very clear correlation for a lot of people. Other systems that are affected are your immune system, because who cares about malaria when you're about to be smushed by a hippo, right? Priorities. Your reproductive system also just takes a back seat because who cares about babies if you're going to be smushed by this hippo? So a lot of people have digestive responses to stress. A lot of people have reproductive responses to stress, dysmenorrhea, infertility issues. You hear stories all the time about women who can't conceive. They're trying to conceive and they can't conceive. And then they adopt a child and all the pressure's off and then they're pregnant. Like this is just this very common story, this very common thread, because the stress of like not being able to, have a baby when you want to is so much that it's actually interfering with their fertility. So what I'm saying is that there are systems in your body that all respond to stress that you may not be consciously aware of, have no conscious control of. Going back to that moment with the hippo, all those things are happening in your body. And what it's preparing you to do is to save all your energy to run, to jump, to climb, to hide, to, crawl over the rocks and then hide in the cleft and then look out and be panting and like scared and oh, what's happening? And the hippo's walking away. The hippo is like satisfied and like got you out of the territory or whatever. And you have saved your life by using up all of the neurotransmitters, all of the energy, all of the additional oxygen that you got from your blood pumping and your breath deepening. You have used the stress response cycle, the physiological cycle that happened in your body to save your life. You have eliminated the thing that caused your stress, and how you do that is by using up the actual stress response in your body. That's the complete stress response cycle. So that when you're there and the hippo's walking away, you feel elated and powerful and ready for whatever comes next. Like the sky seems a little bluer and the sun shines a little brighter, and you want to jump up and down and hug your friends and family. Like that feeling is the complete stress response cycle. And it's a direct result of moving your body through that physiological cycle. It is not a direct result of the hippo walking away. Because if the hippo got struck by lightning, you would still be saved. But if you were still in that moment of like the flood of first seeing the hippo and all those neurotransmitters, and then it gets struck by lightning, and you like take your first step to run, and then there's no more threat, you're not instantly like in that state of jumping up and down and the sun shining brighter and the sky being blue. That doesn't happen because the threat is gone. It happens because the stress in your body has been processed and used up. And the problem with stress these days is that fight or flight are not how we solve our problems. Like that's not how you get through a doctoral program. Unfortunately, the way you get through a doctoral program is by being polite and smiling and standing in line and filling out the paperwork and going to the professor who treats you like crap and being nice because he has the power to prevent you from finishing your degree. This one individual who thinks he knows everything and clearly does not, and you have to like stroke his ego and be polite and not tell him that Dunning-Kruger has entered the room and he is not an expert in this thing that you're talking about. You have to be nice. And so you can feel your heart pumping and you can feel your breath and you can feel your muscles tightening, and also your immune system is backing down and your reproductive system is taking a break. All these things are happening in your body because you have to not fight or flight. You can't. It's not how you solve that problem. So the thing you have to do is separate the process of dealing with the thing that causes your stress. And yes, I am thinking of one specific professor when I tell that story. You have to deal with him in a separate process, and then you have to deal with the stress in your body in a separate process that just moves the stress out, uses up the hormones and the neurotransmitters, moves the muscles from a point of tension to relaxation. And there are good news, lots and lots of ways to do that. And this is really good news. When I learned this, I was like, oh, because what it means is I thought I had to wait until I finished my doctorate in order to feel better. I thought when I get rid of this stressor, when I am no longer in this program, I'm going to be fine. Nope. Nope, I don't have to wait till I finish the thing because I can deal with the stress in my body right now. And the really great thing about that is once I'm dealing with the stress in my body and I start to feel better, then completing the program becomes so much easier because I'm not literally suffering physical illness due to the stress building up in my body. I'm letting that process through and I feel physically better. Therefore, it's easier to do this work. And it also means that once you're finished with your degree, once the thing that causes your stress is gone, that doesn't necessarily mean that you've dealt with all the stress from the program. So once you're done, it took me a solid 3 years after my doctorate was done. I finished my doctorate in 2013. It was 2016 when I noticed, oh, I'm like a person again. Like I remember who this is, this Amelia, this pre-doctoral Amelia who knows how to, like, connect with myself and it so, yeah, it's a long-term ongoing process, but it's a totally doable thing and a learnable skill. Should we talk about the things that you can do in order to complete the stress response?
Yes, let's do that because I was going to say the biggest thing that you're sharing is recognizing that there's a stress, but then what do you do about it? So yes, let's talk about that. What are some things like people can do?
Yeah, this is really important. The most efficient thing the research shows when you're experiencing a stress response cycle, when you're being chased by the hippo, what do? You run. So, for at a population level, the most efficient thing to complete the stress response cycle is to run, is physical activity. And this is true for the overwhelming majority of people. Like any kind of physical motion will remind your body that it is capable of moving you from danger to safety, from stress to relaxation. This is not true for everyone. And yeah, it can be like, 30 to 40 minutes of cardiovascular at least 3 times a week, and the advice we all know. But I was doing that. I've always been an exerciser. I belong to gyms. I'm a good girl and I do what I'm told. So I've always done this, but it wasn't working for me because it turns out not everybody's the same. Like Emily, my identical twin sister, raised in the same house with me, is just a natural exerciser. She always loved exercise, and she talked about, like, riding her bike up the hills of Pennsylvania and, like, the fields and the cows and the sky, and she's like, "One with the I literally thought she was making it up, but no, it turns out most people really have this response to exercise, and that feeling of the one with the cows is the complete stress response cycle. It's that's what that is, and it works. It's the most efficient thing for most people. However, some people, A, it just doesn't work for. B, some people don't have access to the resources, as in the time, the space, the safety to go do a thing that will do that for them. Some people do not have the physical resources. They have different abilities in their bodies. Or say you're a woman and you go walking in your neighborhood and you get catcalled. And now this thing that was supposed to be a source of relieving your stress has become a source of stress, and you get home from your walk and you just feel worse. Or if you're a trans person and you walk into a gym and you would dare to use a locker room, you could be taking your life in your hands. So the idea that stress is relieved by exercise is just not that simple. It's not even close to that simple. So if you have access and you have a safe way to do physical activity, yes, it is the most efficient way. So try if you can, but if you don't, the good news is there are so many other things that complete the stress response cycle. The next one that I would recommend is sleep. A good night's sleep. During sleep, your whole body deeply relaxes, the muscles get a rest, your brain gets a rest. That's good for you. But even more important to the stress response is REM sleep, where you're dreaming. It's the rapid eye movement because you're experiencing dreams, which are kind of reliving, practicing, reprocessing stuff you learned in the past. That day, the famous research we all probably know about, like the Tetris thing, where you play Tetris all day and then you go to sleep and you dream about Tetris and you wake up in the morning and you're better at Tetris, not because you stayed up all night practicing Tetris, but because while you were asleep, your brain practiced Tetris and made you better at Tetris. So, like, if you're studying, instead of pulling all nighter, it's much more efficient to sleep and then allow the information to process in your brain. You'll wake up and just know the information better. We need 7 to 9 hours. My sister is a 7 and a again, genetically identical, raised in the same household. She needs 7.5 hours of sleep. I have always been a 9-hour sleeper. I just need 9 hours of sleep, and that's not because, "Oh, humans only need 8 hours of sleep, and if you're 9 hours, then you're lazy." Nope, turns out people just vary. Even genetically identical twins raised in the same household, we vary. So how much sleep you need does not mean anything about your moral value. If you need less sleep, I mean, that's convenient for you because that's the thing that capitalism has chosen to prioritize. Good for you. You're lucky. It's a kind of privilege. Same goes with your sleep schedule. You might be an early bird where you want to be asleep by 9 o'clock and then awake at 5 a.m. And if that is you, congratulations. Early bird privilege is a thing because that's the schedule capitalism chose. And if you can fit your life into that schedule, that's awesome. That's convenient for you. I'm a night owl. which actually is good for me as a musician because most of my life is like evening rehearsals and then getting up later in the morning, except when I was a teacher in a school for 7 years when I had to be at work at 7 a.m. and I was done at 3 p.m. And what? I mean, still, even then, as a teacher, when you're a music teacher, you have rehearsals at night and stuff. But like, yeah, if your natural sleep schedule doesn't align with the schedule that capitalism shows, bankers' hours, as they call them, it's inconvenient and it's more difficult to get your life to fit into an external life. But that's not because your sleep schedule is wrong or that you are wrong or somehow lazy. It's that there's a disconnect between you and your environment, which is the most common reason people burn out, not because that they themselves are flawed or they don't have access to the thing they need due to because they're not trying hard enough. No, they're trying as hard as they can, but who they are simply doesn't line up with what the world wants them to be. And that's just sleep. However, sleep is really good for you. If you can find a way to get it, please, please do. If you change nothing else about your life and you just get adequate sleep, you're going to feel so much better. There's also creative self expression, which worked for me because, like, I'm a musician. And I was like, oh, all these people who I know who become professional musicians, every single one of them got into music in the first place because of an experience they had usually as children where they left a stage after performance or a room after a rehearsal and went, that was the most amazing experience of my life. And they don't know why and they can't articulate it, but it's this like sky seems bluer, sun shines brighter, love your friends and family feeling. Because when you sing or dance or play or sculpt or knit or cook or prepare or like write, you can take whatever's inside you and pour it out through this creative medium. You can make a thing and you're making it out of your energy. You're literally making it out of you. And then you can pour out uncomfortable things into that thing. Creative self expression. That's the way it kind of purges and moves the discomfort, the stress out of your body into somewhere safe, like onto a page or into a sculpture or a painting, etc. And I'll say two more that are like directly related, which is a big old cry or ridiculous belly laughter. Either one where like the experience of laughing or crying just like takes over your body and you can't stop it. And you're just like ridiculous open mouth, abdomen crunching, like whether it's laughter or crying. Laughter's more fun. Crying is less convenient and less socially accepted, but it's just as effective as long as you're not feeding the crying thoughts of like, the thing that made you cry. You have to set the thoughts about like, I can't believe he said that, or I can't believe she did that. Like you just put that in a box to deal with that information later. That's the stressor, the thing that caused the stress. And you turn toward the sensation of crying instead with non-judgment, not uh-oh, I'm crying, but just like, oh, I'm crying. I'm hot and I feel tension in my shoulders and oh, my nose is running and wow, there's a lot of just like leakage from my eyeballs and there's a little bit of and you don't judge it, you just like let it happen. Laughter and crying both purge emotion in that way that leaves you kind of exhausted but relieved at the same time. The same way you might feel after like a good workout or a good night's sleep, not exhausted, but like relieved and refreshed and kind of ready for the next thing. So there's four pretty big ones. There's more, but in that list, everybody's going to find something of that list that works for them. I hope.
That was a great list, and people need to pick up the book to read the others that you include, but I totally appreciate that. And I appreciate the comments you made about sleep too, which I believe the power of sleep is underestimated. And I think that sleep is also the first thing to go when people are trying to be productive, when people are in their doc program. It's like, okay, I'm going to cut back on sleep so I can push out this paper or push out like reading this article or book or whatever the case might be. And so I appreciate your thoughts and comments on that. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about, the doc program and how there are so many ideas and things around productivity. And I want to talk about like maybe if you have like some thoughts around how women of color doctoral students can push back on some of the ideas that are centered on productivity, which I think is kind of tied into what you were talking about in terms of rest and things of that nature. Like, what are your thoughts around that and ways that folks can push back on that?
I'm a white lady, so I can't speak directly to the experience of women of color or like recommend, here's a thing you should do, because that is not my place. But I do know that the history of academia is one of misogyny, white supremacy, and like cis heteronormative exploitative capitalist patriarchy. It's rooted in the medieval idea that the son of the noble needs to have something to do with himself. And so he goes to school and someone else teaches and raises your kid for you. And these young men who are too young to like get married and have families and be in charge of the estate, but they're too old to be, just at home eating someone else's food. So they go to school. And the culture that grows up around that is, let's just say problematic. But it also has a lot to do with like kind of proving who you are through this ritualistic grind, through this hazing that happens, not just through like fraternities, but also from the professors to the students of like, they all went through this process where they were forced to work as hard as possible to prove their merit. And therefore, their students now have to go through that same grind, and it's about earning it. And knowing that that history and that culture wrapped up just between how white men treat each other, and then when you add into that history the way white men treated women of all kinds, how white men treated people of color of all genders, the exploitation that is inherent in the way that the hierarchy of a university or any academic setting is inherently built in to carry misogyny and white supremacy. It means that who you are is not welcome. Who you are is a direct challenge to who they are and what they believe they deserve and what they believe they earned, and therefore what you have to prove about who you are, what you deserve, and what you earn. And how women of color disconnect from that in the wide world is an amazing challenge to have to overcome, and particularly in an academic setting. For me, it was academia and classical music, where classical music is, it's made of white supremacy. It's made of misogyny. I've actually had white men, of course, talk to me about, including women composers in the canon and say to me, well, isn't there like a time and a place for that? Like there's a place for women and it's not in the primary canon. And I'm like, we are the academics. We decide what the canon is. We have the choice, we have the power. And I'm pointing this story out because this is the ignorance that's held by the establishment. The default, they just don't even notice that they're carrying this ill-considered, unthought through default canon in their minds of what should be. And it's exactly what they've been taught. And white men see no reason to challenge this because it's always been true. It always worked for them. They've never felt like they were on the outside. They've never felt excluded. And a friend of mine who was a PhD student at the same time that I was getting my doctorate in musical arts, she was writing her dissertation on a woman composer. And when you take your big final exams at the end, they're supposed to be in support of your dissertation. So one of the things as a music student that you do is you take a test where you look at blank scores with no identifying features. And just from the content of the music on the page, you say who the composer probably is. You make a guess and then you support your guess with like information about the content of the music. And you get 5 of these. And she's preparing to write a dissertation on a woman composer, and they gave her no women composers. So she intentionally guessed wrong to guess at least one woman composer. She knew it was wrong, but she thought there should be at least one woman listed on this thing. And they made her retake the whole section because she included a woman. And she told them in her, oral defense of her exams, like, you didn't give me any women. And when she retook it again, there were no women in the canon. Okay, so all I've done so far, I apologize, all I've done so far is talk about how bad it is and my recognition of how terrible it is. So what you do, the cure for all of burnout actually, is not self-care. I would never think that a woman of color or any person who doesn't conform to the very narrow socially constructed ideal could possibly resist this intense pressure from the outside on their own. Like, you can't stand up in a flood and expect just to, be strong enough to do it on your own. The cure for burnout is all of us caring for each other. Um, and that, in fact, is the only way you're going to get through an academic program where you're being told that you don't fit, that you don't belong, that who you are and what your ideas are not valid and do not fit into the canon or whatever the construct of the context of your particular field is. You need other people. We call it in the book the bubble of love. It's the people around you who care about your well-being as much as you care about theirs. And how it works to protect you from the, white supremacist misogyny is when you are feeling, oh my god, I'm wrong. Oh my god, I don't fit in. This pressure I feel is hurting me and I must collapse under it or I'll just shatter into pieces. These are the people who turn to you and say, nope, you deserve love and respect just as you are. Who you are is valid. Who you are deserves care. Who you are deserves attention and a freaking doctoral degree just as you are. Yes, those people are being mean to you. They're asking something of you that does not fit who you are, and they're not interested in having their ideas challenged. And yes, they have the power to deprive you of the rest of your career by denying you the completion of this degree, not based on any academic merit. They can just do it for whatever reason they feel like, and their own prejudices will continue to go unquestioned. And that is okay with the establishment. That's literally legal to do. And so the system is just broken as can be. And the only way to get through a system in order to get over that stupid ass hurdle, in order to become part of the establishment and to change what it is, which is the goal, is to surround yourself with other people who can remind you, no, 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 that flood you're experiencing is a real flood. It is not okay. It's happening, but we are here to protect you and to remind you that you deserve the strength to overcome it. We're going to come here and help you. We're going to stand with you and hold you through that challenge. Does that make sense?
Totally, totally. I think there's an isolating nature of burnout and stress, right? There's shame attached to that. I think even if we think about the workplace or even in the academic setting, if you were to share that, there is, I would imagine, this opportunity to kind of take advantage of that and to make you feel as if you don't need to be here. Like you are weak, and that is a way to kind of purge you out of the workplace, to purge you out of the academic setting. And so I appreciate that you talked about community and having that safe space, which is something that I talk about a lot on the show. And so creating a circle, the bubble of support that you need to help you go through that process. I think the other thing too, and this is just a personal piece to the burnout, is like I shared, I've gone through burnout. I'm actually still in it, right? And so I think that's an important piece, that it doesn't go away, or it could bubble up at different points. Like you talked about, you had it 1 year and then the next year you were hospitalized as well. And so I think we need to talk more about it with people that we trust. And when I spoke to some folks, I was just surprised at how much their stories were very much like mine, and just the importance of sharing our stories so that we can all kind of get to freedom, right? Like to where we can get to a better place. And so I really appreciate that.
I just want to respond real quick to the idea that if you shared, oh God, if you dared share with your professor that you're feeling stressed or burnt out, to them, that's totally part of the process. That's just okay. That's as it should be because they did it too and they survived and they're there. And there's no recognition of the fact that they, as white men, didn't experience the same level or kind of stress that you do. Like, there's no acknowledgement. There was never any acknowledgement that to this day, I'm the only woman who completed that doctoral program in conducting at that particular school. There are plenty of women with doctorates in conducting, but not from that school because that's where the white misogyny was particularly bad. Yeah, so there was never any acknowledgement that what I was going through was unique or different from anything anybody else was going through, even though it demonstrably was. So, yeah, the idea that you would tell somebody else and they'd have any compassion, no, they think compassion is not their job, although it should be. compassion should be like number one.
Yeah, I think speaking about that, yeah, that's so toxic to just be like, it is what it is. That's just how it is. And so I think with that, I think what's related could be this whole idea of how can friends and family, professors, bosses kind of embrace the framework that you're talking about to avoiding and dealing with burnout. Like what can people do better?
When I became a professor, I was very lucky. When I graduated, I had I had a full-time faculty position within 6 weeks of getting my degree. Very lucky, very lucky. And when I became a professor, I was thrilled to have the opportunity not to perpetuate that cycle and to become someone who acknowledged that my students are human beings, who have lives, who have challenges outside of school, whose challenges are different from mine. And if I can, just be guided by the quote I always keep in mind from Audre Lorde that I cannot be free while any woman is unfree, even while her shackles are very different from my own. And recognizing that the experience I had been through would not be like the experience anybody else had been through, but they all have their challenges. And just because it was hard for me doesn't mean that anyone else deserves to have it be that hard for them. So, learning how to compassion and not carrying around, oh god, this is the problem that I have to talk about a lot because white feminism is a trap for this, that white women have such a challenge of facing misogyny and clawing their way through danger in the world just because you're a feminine human, that you start to feel really bitter about it and to think that nothing could be harder than what you've been through, and staying open to someone else's challenges, suffering, pain, and allowing those people's challenges to change how you live your life and how you treat others, rather than just carrying around defensiveness and thinking, well, of course, women feel like they have to protect themselves all the time because we are literally always in danger. Women do not have legal bodily autonomy in the United States. Like, it's really hard to be a woman. And so of course we feel defensive, and we use a shield as our primary way of advancing upon the world, and it feels really unsafe to open yourself to the possibility that someone else has other suffering that we then have to take down our shield to make room for their challenges. But we do. And able bodied people have to do it for people with disabilities, and neurotypical people have to do it for people with neurodiversity, and English speaking people have to do it for people who don't speak English as their first language in the United States. And people who are cis have to do it for people who are trans or non binary. So it's all the intersections, but anytime you aren't all of the ideal, like rich, white, male, thin, cis, straight, educated, from the right family, like if you don't conform to this very narrow socially constructed ideal, then you feel oppressed all the time. And you don't notice all the things about your life that actually have made it easier. Like maybe you come from a supportive family and you take that for granted, and you don't know that like somebody next to you seems like they've got all the access to everything they need in the world, but they came from this incredibly difficult family. So basically what I'm saying is recognize your headwinds, all of the challenges that you face, and your tailwinds, which are more difficult to notice, the times that you've been pushed forward and things have been made easier for you. So what we can do, all of us who are not currently facing the challenge of trying to get through a doctoral program while being a woman of color, are to deal with our own shit, are to deal with our own pain, to turn toward our experiences with kindness and compassion and heal our internal wounds so that we have the strength and the capacity to turn toward other people's difficult feelings with kindness and compassion. Because as soon as we hear about their pain, it's not going to open up our wounds again because our wounds are healed enough. That sounds like really impractical advice that's not going to like help an individual person right here, right now. But if you are the friend or family member of someone who's going through a really difficult thing, and from experience, let me tell you that a doctoral program where you are not supported as an individual, where your humanity, where your race, your gender, your neuro status, your mental illness, your physical challenges are not welcomed or accommodated or politely and kindly and compassionately, dealt with and addressed. It's incredibly difficult because people only go into doctoral programs because they really care. You only begin a doctoral program because you are passionate, because you can't imagine yourself doing anything else. It's like becoming an actor, like, or a professional musician, like a performing musician is you don't go into that life unless there's nothing else you can see for your future because it's just so hard. It's just so rare. You're just so unlikely to actually accomplish and achieve those dreams. It is so difficult, is what I'm saying. So if someone is going through that and you're like, I can't deal with this person's challenges. I don't have the capacity to turn toward them. You got to heal your own wound so that it doesn't feel like it's going to harm you to open yourself up to their difficult feelings.
That was really good, in terms of dealing with your own stuff. And I think it's important to even ask the person if they have the capacity to listen to you. I think as the person that's, dealing with that, or just listen. If you're getting this reaction or whatever, just listen and not judge if you're on the other side of that. So yes, and recognizing that.
Yeah, non-judgment. It's like so easy to say, "Oh, just turn toward it with non-judgment," but like you're having judgment whether you're aware of it or not. There's judgment happening in your brain, and being able to recognize judgment when it happens in your brain, that's a learnable skill. It takes time and it takes practice, but it's worth it. And noticing difficult feelings when they're in your body is also a learnable skill. I actually have a condition called alexithymia, which is a clinical inability to sense my own internal experience, which is one of the reasons why I burned out so hard and I ended up in the hospital. Like, because obviously there was stuff that was wrong before the hospital inducing pain. I just didn't notice it because I kind of a incapacity to sense my own internal experience until it's like I can't hear it until it's shouting at me, you know? Um, but even I have learned it. And if I can learn it, anybody can learn it. But it does take time and practice of like turning toward your internal experience and being like, hey, body, what do you have to tell me? Which sounds so woo woo and like touchy feely, hoopy doopy, questionable, non scientific, but actually it is completely evidence based. It's one of the reasons that I had such a hard time learning it was because I didn't believe it was real. It sounded so woo woo, but it actually is a real thing. Where that was going was that learning to sense your own internal experience, including feelings of judgment and your own discomfort that is making you defensive rather than being open to someone else's experience, listening to someone. If you need a guideline about how to listen to someone, here's what you do. When someone is telling you about their difficult feelings, you just say things that are cheerleader based. Yay! Or those people suck and I'm on your side and I want you to win. So if you're having any kind of challenges about feeling uncomfortable because of someone else's discomfort, your default is just to say a thing that shows that you support them and are on their side. And that's it. No solving of their problems, no questioning of their responses, just cheerleader.
Love that. Let us all strive to be cheerleaders so that we can support the folks who may be having a hard time.
And then if it stresses you out just to be the cheerleader because you feel like you missed something inside yourself, turn toward that with kindness and compassion in a separate process. That's not the job of the person who you're there to help and to serve. You deal with your own, issues in a separate thing. But in an ideal world, this conversation happens between two people who care about each other's well-being as much as the other cares about the others, and you can talk and share. So this is actually an evidence-based practice for relationships, for romantic relationships in particular, but it also works for friendships. A 30-minute stress-reducing conversation where one person talks for 15 minutes and the other person's the cheerleader, and then you switch. And it turns out that even though it feels like, oh, how do I be a cheerleader when I'm having so many hard feelings? It turns out that when you do this like reciprocal 15-minute stress inducing trade off, it actually creates energy. So you walk away from this conversation with more energy than you had when you started. It's not draining for most people in most situations. I mean, nothing's 100% true for everybody, but the research shows that this is how you do it. And it's not draining and it's not a burden on either one of the people who's doing it. Because a lot of the questions we get are about, oh, how do I ask for help when everybody around me is also swamped? It turns out when we turn toward each other, when we help each other, the science says that it gives us more energy. It actually makes us feel better when we come toward each other with compassion.
I love that. As an introvert, I definitely would appreciate that because a lot of times I'm getting info like from someone else and then don't feel that there's space for me to then,
Oh,
share what I might be going through. So I
yeah, you can
appreciate.
just formally say, like, "Here's what we're doing for 15 minutes. You talk, I'll be your cheerleader, and then we'll trade." And when it feels so, it might feel artificial or structured in a kind of an arbitrary, meaningless way, but actually those kind of like, structures help. I don't know. I'm autistic, so like I enjoy boundaries. I enjoy knowing what the rules are. It makes me really happy to know that like this is the box that this conversation is happening in. Uh, so I don't know if it's that true for all people, but the research shows that it's beneficial to people. So there you go. I think it's John and Julie Gottman did that research. If people want to look into the details.
Love it. I'll add that to the show notes as well as a link to the book as well so that people can pick it up.
The best thing about the book is the references and the endnotes, because everything, all of the studies are cited in the book, and I mean, if you're an academic and you're in a doctoral program and trying to make your way through, you're gonna love the endnotes. They're real thorough. Everything is cited. Nothing is just taken for granted. Everything is evidence-based, because that's what I needed. When I was in my doctoral program, I needed somebody to show me the science that proved that having a conversation could reduce my stress, because I didn't believe it. I thought having a conversation was just stress inducing, not stress relieving. But science says no. So I learned how to do it. And oh my God, it works even for me.
Awesome. Love it. And I know our audience would appreciate that too with the references and everything. And so, Amelia, this has been such a great conversation. I can talk to you forever. I love how expressive you are too with your hand. Like you're not conducting music right now, but what you're saying is music to my ears in terms of exploring this whole topic. And so, do you mind sharing how folks can connect with you, how they can follow you before you go?
I am sometimes on Instagram at Burnout Book Group, but not much because social media tends to be kind of toxic. So I sometimes stay away. I also started recently a YouTube channel called Autistic Burnout because I last year was diagnosed with autism and explained a lot about my life. And it also explained a lot about the book, about why it's not like other books. Because we wrote it for like 19-year-old Amelia. That was the imaginary audience, was like me at 19. What would I have needed to know? And me being autistic, turns out I needed to know things that most self-help books take for granted that people know, like that emotions are real and they happen in your body. So anyway, that channel's about how it relates to autism. It's very small and niche. Like, I know that, but that's one of the things I'm doing right now. Otherwise, the next thing that's happening is that Emily and I are creating a workbook version of Burnout. So if people are like, I don't have time for all those receipts, I just want results, the workbook is coming out, I think, in like November.
Ooh, yay. Awesome. So we will definitely add that to the show notes when it does come out. And then we'll link to the overall webpage too for the both of you. So I'll definitely do that. Again, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing how the audience can work through burnout, what it is, and how we can close that stress cycle and how we can support others going through that whole process. This has been such a great conversation, and I know the audience will really gain a lot from it.
I hope so.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Writing on My Mind podcast. If you'd like to support the podcast, make sure you follow the show wherever you listen to podcasts, rate the show, and leave a comment on Apple Podcast. You can also donate to the show by clicking the support link in the show notes. Your donations help me to continue to put out new episodes to help support you and other women of color doctoral students. I'd also love it if you could spread the word to other women of color doctoral students to grow our community. Be sure to also follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Dr. Emmanuela. That's DrEmmanuela. See you on the next episode.